My Sinister Harry Potter crossover short story, Harry Potter and the Babylonian Deity. Author's note. This short story is a crossover between two movie series, Harry Potter movies and the Sinister movies. I do not own the rights to either. This story is probably geared more to Sinister fans. Harry Potter fans may not like what I'm doing to the characters to make them fit into the Sinister theme. There are spoilers for both movies. The events at the beginning of this story take place before the events in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and 10 years before the events in the first Sinister movie. Chapter 1. The Letters and the Owls. Year 1998. The owl swooped down from the clouds. It stared intently at the scenery below, which was rather uninteresting in its uniformity. There were rows upon rows of identical houses on evenly proportioned lots. This area was all about conformity. Not one house even dared to paint its walls a slightly lighter shade of the agreed-upon tan color. If anyone had been out, they may have been shocked to see an owl. It was not an extraordinary-looking owl. However, owls were not common in this area. Lack of trees and even the scarcity of shrubs discouraged most wildlife from taking residence. This was probably the intention, for wild birds would make a nuisance of themselves by bombing cars and laundry and singing too early in the morning. This owl, though, wasn't quite as ordinary as it seemed. It was from the wizard world, a world that most people that lived below didn't even know existed. Spotting its destination, the owl dived lower. It instinctively knew where to go, but the destination was easy to spot, sticking out like a sore thumb among its well-manicured neighbors. At one time, 4 Privet Drive had resembled the neighboring houses in being well-maintained and conforming to the cookie-cutter mold. However, 2 years earlier, something bad had happened, something that wasn't supposed to happen in neighborhoods like this. Since the tragedy, the house had become a stain on the neighborhood. Though it sported the same paint color as all the rest, it seemed darker, more brooding and spooky. The yard was overgrown. It was an eyesore the neighbors all begrudged, particularly those who lived next door to it. In fact, one of the neighbors soon sold her house to move into a matching house down the street, not being able to stand living next door to that house. It was the house that everyone tried to pretend didn't exist, as if that lot had a void. People walked by it as quickly as possible, and some crossed to opposite side of the stream. The hair on animals would stand up when they neared the property. The friendliest of pets would suddenly whine with fear or snarl. Sometimes they seemed to see something no one else could see. Children would dare each other to enter the yard, but stray balls or frisbees became permanent residents as no one was brave enough to enter. The owl didn't pick up on any of these bad vibes, intent on its task, which was to deliver a letter. It slowed and neatly flung the letter through the mail slot. Mission accomplished, it landed on the roof. It had a long journey and it was feeling a bit peckish. Fortunately, the overgrown yard was perfect for attracting mice. The owl scrutinized a corner of the yard in particular. Suddenly it flew down with lightning reflexes and grabbed something in its talons. There was an abruptly cut-off squeak. Inside the house, a letter laid on the floor. Its contents would have upset the former owners, and probably would have made one little boy happy. However, no one now would come to pick it up. The house was empty, and the only creatures that stirred within were the spiders and mice. Professor Dumbledore was standing in the clock tower admiring the view. Professor Dumbledore? Professor McGonagall's voice interrupted the headmaster's reverie. Dumbledore turned and smiled. Yes, Professor McGonagall? had worked together for years, they rarely called each other by their first names. He could only recall her calling him Albus once, and that was the night the Potters had been killed. The shock of the situation, no doubt, had caused her to resort to familiarity. Harry Potter's guardians, she said with distaste, have failed to respond to the letter I sent. Dumbledore sighed heavily and sat down. Ah, well, that was to be expected. What do you propose to do about it? He smiled wryly. Keep writing until the letters become impossible to ignore. Nobody had noticed the one owl, but as time went on it became impossible to ignore the growing army of owls that came down from the heavens and seemed drawn by a magnet to 4 Privet Drive. As if it isn't bad enough what happened there, complained the neighbor that lived next door to 4 Privet Drive that hadn't moved. Now we have to deal with this. To the residents it seemed as bad of luck as the 10 plagues of Egypt. The owls were a bother. They hooted incessantly, even during the day. They weren't particular where they aimed their droppings, whether it was on a pie cooling on a windowsill or a bald man's head. One had flown into an open window and snatched a beloved hamster. As if the droppings were not bad enough, they also left regurgitated pellets of their digested food. One Sunday morning, the peace of the neighborhood was disturbed by the sound of exploding glass. The neighbors came out onto their lawns to see what the commotion was, some still in their robes and pajamas. 4 Privet Drive was bursting from the inside. The house bulged and groaned as what looked like confetti came flying out of the broken windows and the splintered doors. It wasn't confetti, but letters that the house was puking out. The letters had filled the house until it couldn't hold any more. They had come through the chimney, the tub, the sinks, and yes, even from the WC. They had filled every room in the house from floor to ceiling, including the cupboard under the stairs, which is where the boy who the letters were addressed to used to live. Some of the braver neighbors picked up the letters that littered the ground or caught them as they dropped from the air. And the one thing they all noticed was that the letters were identical in content. All came from the same destination, and all were addressed to the same person, Harry Potter. In the wizard world, everyone knew Harry Potter's name. He was the boy who lived, the boy who had miraculously survived a death curse and who had destroyed the Dark Lord. He was the boy everyone was looking forward to seeing attend his first year at Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Sorcery. In the Muggle world, many people knew Harry Potter's name too, particularly the people who lived in the vicinity of 4 Privet Drive. He was the boy who mysteriously vanished and probably is chopped to pieces somewhere.